Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about fog. This was originally supposed to be a more quick talk at the GEM night. The turnout to that was mediocre at best, and so Patrick asked that I push it to tonight. So I lengthened it a bit, and hopefully you'll find it useful. So Wesley Beery is the guy behind Fog originally. You can find it on GitHub. It was moved to the Fog organization this week, actually. Fog.io is the website that hopefully have a lot of documentation eventually, and then you can follow it on Twitter. So I'm kind of going to take this from two angles. One is I know I want to use an API, and the other is just using an API as opposed to using management consoles. I personally am one to favor having a little script folder that I open up as opposed to opening up management consoles and clicking through wizards and stuff like that. So kind of the idea here is that APIs generally, though, are a pain in the butt. If you're going to use one, unless you wrote it, in that case, it's awesome. But unless you wrote it, it sucks. It's usually really hard. You know, sometimes it's because it's XML and everything else you're dealing with is JSON. The other way around, maybe it's SOAP, and then you just want to kill yourself. In any way, it usually hurts. So usually, if you're going to start working with a provider, use their service, consume their API, you search for something. Often it's not so good. Somebody took some time to write something, but if you look at the code, it's untested or whatever. I just feel like this happens to me all the time. I search for a library, start using something new and cool, and just find that no one's really done a very good job of wrapping it in Ruby. So the DIY kicks in. You spend a whole bunch of time wrapping it, making sweet little library for it. You release it. You now have to support it. Yay. Then another vendor comes around, and you want to use theirs because it does your laundry on top of everything that came with the other library, and now you're kind of out of luck. So this is a short list, actually, of some of the providers that Fog handles in its code. I'm sure most of you, I mean, how many of you have used more than one of the items on this list? Probably pretty much everybody. This is actually just the list that of stuff that I've personally used with Fog. So you can, if you notice, there's like storage, there's servers, there's DNS, there are a couple other, like they're getting into like domain registration. Pretty much anything that is a cloud service is eligible to be part of Fog. It's designed to be really cross-service compatible, and I'm going to show you some of the methods that get called. To get started, pretty darn simple, gem install Fog and require it. Start with cloud storage. So can everybody read this, at least to a certain extent? I think it's big enough. So at the top there, we are connecting to S3. In the middle, we're connecting to Google. At the bottom, we're connecting to Rackspace. As you can see, it is not hard at all to switch between providers. At the bottom there, we are calling put object, which is uploading a file to S3, Google, and Rackspace, and the API is identical. Rackspace calls buckets containers, but it's all just a string anyway. So what Fog aims to do, and I'm just showing this example with storage, but they have consistency in all the methods that they call, or that all the methods that are available to you, and then they have an options hash that's more provider specific. So for example, in S3, you can put object and you can specify reduced redundancy in the options hash, which costs less, stored in less data centers, whatever. So in all of the providers, in all of the services that are available, that's kind of the convention, is come up with a method that pretty much everybody implements one way or another, and then have an options hash to handle any edge cases that are just for them. So it keeps it consistent, but also super flexible. So moving on to servers, I personally am very into, I enjoy the ops side of code, and so I spend a lot of time doing automation stuff, and I choose Fog for this. Top, middle, and let's see. Yeah, so just we're just doing EC2, which is Amazon, and Rackspace Cloud for booting up servers. As you can see, the creating a new compute object is pretty much identical, and the differences between creating a Rackspace server and a EC2 server are negligible. So it just really helps avoid vendor lock-in. You can switch between providers like nothing. Another example is DNS. I'm only showing Zerigo here, but Dynect works just about the same way. Creating zones, creating hosts. I think you get the idea. So that's kind of under the impression that you intend to implement an API, and you're actually maybe excited about making things easier for you, or you're building a service that needs to use that. So another reason to use APIs are to just write scripts for yourself to make things easier. To me, if you've used the Management Console from Amazon or the Rackspace Cloud Control Panel, they made it a little bit better recently, but it still hurts. The Amazon Management Console, like the multi-step wizards, they kill me every time. I swear I boot up, I'll try using RDS, and I'll go through the 5-step wizard and realize that, oh, I screwed up, one flag on one of the pages, and I have to kill it and boot another one. Also, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but Amazon Management Console misses a lot of features. They are primarily an API service, and they added the Management Console on later. So if you open up the Management Console and think, oh, this is Amazon Web Services, you're actually missing out on a lot. They're slow, and you can only use one account at a time. So they're not necessarily ideal. Here's just an example of firing up RDS. We're on step 2 of 5 there to boot that sucker. And we can do the same thing. And I'm actually specifying some options there that aren't even required. So I usually, I just kind of hang on to little scripts like this, knowing that I will use them again and can tweak them really easily without really thinking about it too much. Here's an example of something that if you use, how many of you have used RDS? So RDS has a really dumb default that the servers are created without UTF-8 as the default collation. So everything is Latin. Can really screw you over later on if you don't realize it. And so here's just an example of how you can use Fog to overcome that. And this is something that you cannot do in the Management Console. Similarly, if you ever use load balancers, here it's impossible to add multiple servers to multiple load balancers. You can't put the same server on multiple load balancers from the Management Console, but it's perfectly valid and allowed via the API. So that's something that we do a lot, and so I hang on to this little script and use that when I need to. So Fog is not particularly awesomely documented. It's getting better. It's actually getting a lot better. Most of the documentation is inline. I know you can't see that, but what that is showing is that's showing creating a new zone on Xerago's DNS servers. That's the options that you can provide to the create zone method and the response that you'll get. You should be reading the code that you're using anyway. A lot of people don't, and I think that this kind of encourages that you do. I mean, you can see exactly what the method's doing. Fog is not that complicated. It's really just calling methods. It's not, there's not a whole lot of magic, not a whole lot going on under the hood. And so this encourages you to read the code that you're about to use anyway. It also makes sure that the documentation is pretty up to date. Keeping separate out-of-code documentation just doesn't really work too well. I think Rails is a good example of that. The way that it's organized, if you are looking to get started and play with Fog a little bit, there's basically, after you're in lib/fog, the name of the provider, the name of the the name of the service / requests, models, and parsers. So if you were trying to use Amazon load balancers, you would do lib/fog / AWS / ELB, and then you'd have all of the requests or all the methods that you can call. The models are how those requests are made into Ruby objects, and the parsers are the conversion between the request object that comes back from the HTTP client and what the model ends up looking like. So if you're looking to build your own, like it's really pretty simple. You set up your methods in the requests and determine what they should look like in the models. And there are generic parsers as well to get started. You don't have to necessarily have to write your own parser. Contributing to Fog, if you ever are inclined to, if you have a service, whether it's booting servers, DNS, domain registration, storage, Wesley in particular he's awesome. He's super helpful. The entire set of collaborators on the Fog project are all really helpful. I've submitted partial patches before because I wasn't exactly sure. In this case, it was how Amazon handles errors. It's really hard to, they happen, but it's really hard to trigger an error from Amazon. So anyway, working with and dealing with the team that maintains Fog is awesome, and so I would encourage that you do it if you're into it. And make sure when you're done testing, you delete your servers. I did this 2 months ago. I left 9 or 10 large EC2 instances running for 4 days, and I didn't really expect to pay for that. So, and that's all I got. I'm James, and you can find me there. That's it. Oh yeah, any questions?
Do you use the rdoc.info website to view the generated documentation for Fog?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes.
It keeps it up to date with GitHub, so that's pretty convenient.
True.
Most of the time.
Yeah. They were looking, I think, to separating out documentation onto fog.io, and I think they're kind of backing away from that, just given the maintainability.
James, do you know if Fog has services for hosting, so that you could set up a web hosting account through the API? And if not with Fog, do you use any other automated service to set up the document root, the SFTP account, and all that stuff?
So I guess the answer to that would be if there's an API for it somewhere, you could implement it. So if there was a, let's say Rackspace site or Rackspace Cloud sites opened up an API to their sites. They don't have that now, but if they did, in theory, yeah, you could create accounts. But no, there's nothing. None that I'm aware of right now. Rackspace Cloud Sites is pretty much the only fairly unlimited resource for firing up a quick PHP or just raw HTML site or whatever.
Do they expect you to, so if you're going to add a new provider, for example, do they expect you to just fork and add it and then submit the pull request, or what? Is there any sort of way that you can dynamically plug in providers that you want in certain situations? Like I can imagine in certain situations you might want you might want to enable certain providers and then have the higher level access to that, pick one or something.
The encouraged way would be to fork it and create it. If it's a new provider that's not on there yet, just create a folder inside Fog and add requests.
But every single provider, essentially, there's just one project, and if you're going to use a different provider that's not there, it's going to be committed right to Fog. It's not. There's no way that you can plug in other providers from different projects. Okay.
Yeah. So new providers are getting added all the time, but it's all based on pull requests. Another just quick thing is Fog is sponsored by EngineYard, which is also kind of nice that it's not a dying project. It's what EngineYard Cloud uses to boot all of their servers. So it's kind of nice to know that it's not going anywhere. If you have searched for, S3, the AWS S3 gem, yeah, it works. But when you need to do anything, use any of the newer S3 features, you're kind of out of luck. And so this is up to date. It's staying up to date, and it's safe to say right now it's not going anywhere.
Else? Questions? Yeah.
Do you use, with the logging and all that, is there a standardized logging API or service through Fog so that you can monitor your instances, by connecting or getting the system log or something?
No, there's not. So what I typically do is, let's say you're using Chef. Okay, so initially you use Fog to create the server that you want in the region that you want in the availability zone on the account that you want to, and then from there you can use Fog. Fog has a waiting command that basically sits around and just sleeps until that server is ready, and at that point you can use NetSSH or whatever to SSH in, bootstrap an instance, and then handle your logging elsewhere.
Anyone else? Questions?
Rob?
It's also worth noting that if you use Chef, the knife command that is kind of Chef's way of starting an instance is based on Fog. So
That's
all
correct.
of the everything that Chef does to start servers is all Fog enabled.
That is absolutely correct. So if you're looking for a way from a command line, so just real quick, Knife is it's a kind of an add-on to Chef that basically you can say Knife, command line Knife, EC2 server create, and a bunch of Chef parameters, and it will using the ops code platform and your recipes and roles and everything. It'll send a command to the server that'll bootstrap it, run it with those roles, and it makes things easier. I'm not a big fan of Knife, though.
You always end up writing a little wrapper script
Yes.
that has all of the freaking arguments for
Exactly.
Knife because there's 1,000 of them.
Exactly. Yeah. The average command on my MacBook Air 11-inch is like, 6 or 7 lines. Anything else? Yeah.